everyone. This is Des, and you're listening to the Wellness Project powered by Spotlight Coalition. Thanks so much for joining me today. I think you're going to really enjoy today's episode, especially if you are the parent or guardian of a teenage girl or have a teenage girl in your life. Yes, you heard me right. Teenage girls is today's episode. I am speaking with Chantal Cote, and she is a psychologist and teen life coach. Chantal is going to dig into all things teen girls and relationships with their family members, guardians, trusted adults. So if you have a teenager that isn't very important in your life, then you definitely want to stick around for this episode. Let's speak with Chantal. Everyone, I'm so excited. I'm here with Chantal Cote. She's a psychologist in Alberta, and she's a teen life coach. Chantal, thank you so much for joining me today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you more focus on teenagers. Is that right?
Yeah, I work specifically with teens, even honing in more on my niche. I work specifically with teen girls. So folks between the ages of 12 and 19. And of course, like their natural support systems. So that includes their parents and their caregivers.
I'm very excited to talk to you about this. So let's just start out with something simple. Can you just explain to my audience what exactly is therapy and how do you feel it helps families with their teenage daughters?
For sure. Therapy can take many different forms in how it actually plays out. But at the end of the day, it is about helping someone get to a specific place with their well-being and their health, whether it is, goals around just life in general, whether there's a specific thing that's coming up, such as, with teens, we see a lot of anxiety and stuff. And so perhaps it's learning how to manage that or learning tools to manage their anxiety and whatnot. It could be like relationships, if there's family dynamics. So it's kind of like looking at, what are the things that are going on in a teen's life that are impacting their daily functioning and impacting their ability to live their best life and really helping them learn skills, tools, strategies, as well as ways to get to that place.
Okay, great. And you said you do work with their guardians as well. And what does that look like exactly?
Yeah. So a lot of kind of like family work. And so sometimes what that might look like is having sessions with the parents and the teens where we're working on communication skills or we're working on understanding. So helping parents understand the teens' experience and vice versa. So kind of working on that relationship piece and just knowing that even if a teen comes for a session with me, they still have all these other hours where they have interactions with their parents and their caregivers. And so the more equipped and the more confident that their parents are feeling and being able to support their teens, the better off everyone is, really. So it might look like that, or it might be separate parent sessions. So I have some parents who I don't even really work with the teen necessarily one-on-one that much, but I'll work more with the parents in order to support them to be there for their team. So there's a couple different ways that can look.
Okay, great. And I actually read a statistic recently that said, I don't know the exact numbers, but the article was saying that teenagers actually do better. They have a higher sense of well-being when their parents or guardians are in therapy. Do you agree with that at all? Do you see that in your experience?
I would 100% agree with the sense of if parents are being supported, so whether that means they themselves are receiving therapy, they're a part of the therapeutic process, are getting some sort of, coaching or support. Yeah, 100%. When we have our teens support systems that are feeling well equipped, it is better off overall.
Great. I feel the same way. I have similar experiences with my clients as well. So I know you mentioned anxiety, but what are some other unique struggles that teenage girls are dealing with the most right now?
Well, just to ping off, I guess, of the anxiety and the mental health struggles, from what we've seen statistically, everything's kind of on the rise. I'm over here in Canada, and so I know that a lot of our statistics are saying that mental illness is on the rise, suicide is on the rise. These really difficult things, we've had an increase in hospitalizations and emergency department visits. And so we know our teens are struggling with mental health and well-being altogether. I think that's a really big one. What I've been hearing over this past couple of years has been concern with their peers. This is a big one for teens. They're so oriented to their friends and their peers. And because we're seeing such an increase in struggle with mental health, that means that like every single teen that I work with anyways, and I'm sure I'm not the only one here, knows someone or has a close friend who is really struggling. Either they're struggling with self-harm or suicidal ideation, or they're just struggling in general with different stressors and things going on in their life. And so that's a big one for teens, is that they're worried about their friends. Another one is kind of one that's been around for a really long time, is this idea of like self-image and body image. The difference being is that there's like this huge amount of content and comparison imagery that is coming at our teens all the time, right? They're on their phone, they're on their social media, and they are constantly seeing the pictures, and they're distorted pictures in a sense, because they're portraying these really impossible beauty standards. And so our teens are like seeing that constantly over and over and over again, right? Pictures with filters and pictures that are just not very, very realistic, and pictures that have their brain like constantly comparing. And so I think this whole idea of like self-image and body image is really running rampant. And in fact, I was watching a video the other day. It was just a video on YouTube that kind of showed like different girls at different ages between like 6 and 18ish, and they were asking them questions about like what they thought about their body and what they thought about body image, this idea of body image. And these younger girls were, you know, talking so confidently, like, I'm strong and I can do this and I can do that. And then as the progression goes, you get into the older, like the teen years and older teens, and suddenly the language is not so positive, and it's not about I'm confident. It's kind of like, do I have that thin waist and that larger bottom, or whatever, you know, whatever is kind of trending, I guess, in the world around that. But it's just, it was more focused on picking apart the things that were wrong with their body, as opposed to celebrating their body and what it was capable of. That's a really big one.
Right. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. So do you think that that does stem from social media then, and just the comparisons? Because I know also, you know, I don't know as much that teens are definitely not probably watching a lot of commercials, because, you know, they're probably streaming everything and there's not as many ads, but TV shows, obviously, and the, you know, super skinny, blonde, long hair, blue-eyed main character always. And, you know, do you think that TV shows kind of impact that too, in magazines, things like that?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, I think I said social media, but I completely agree. Like it's a broader kind of sense of kind of like a cultural thing and a social thing of like all things that are coming at the media of different forms, as well as even, you know, within their families and stuff. And I mean, oftentimes when I do work with a teen who is struggling with body image, one of their parents will talk to me about their own struggle with body image and self-image. You know, that piece of like, I just don't want my daughter to suffer the way that I suffered. So that there are often things even within their closer circle that are impacting the way they see themselves as well.
That's definitely interesting. Yeah, I could imagine that a guardian's self-image would affect a teenager's self-image.
A couple other things. I don't want to be too doom and gloom. So
No,
I'm sure we'll talk
absolutely.
about some like positive things, but it's just like, what are teens struggling with? And,
Yeah, no, this is great information.
I think in terms of what's happened over the last couple of years with the pandemic and the changes that have come in response to that, has been particularly difficult for this age group, where a lot of their developmental processes are about, you know, seeking independence, kind of separating from their family of origin, discovering who they are. And then there was like a big period where there was lockdown and isolation and very little access to sports or different organized things happening, extracurricular activities. I think all of that is like kind of adjusting to what that meant, as well as like adaptations to school and academic life. And everything has been really, really difficult for this age group in particular. I mean, I know it's been difficult for everyone. I just really have seen, you know, where teens have struggled with the outcomes of this.
Oh, absolutely. And so I want to go back to a little bit. You said mental health struggles are on the rise in general in this population, probably in the overall population, but with teens. Why do you think that is? Where do you think that is stemming from?
There's a few different things that are happening. One of them being the amount of like stress and pressure, I think, that exists for generations today is different than how things used to be. I think like every single teen, or almost every single teen that I have worked with, has like such a deep heart and compassion for social issues and an awareness for social issues. You know, this is a wonderful thing. And the flip side of it means that these teens are just so self-aware and so aware of all these things going on in the world, and yet they're still young people. And so it's heavy, I think, for for someone at that age to try and make sense of all of this stuff, to have such an awareness and then have a brain that's just like going under all this rewiring kind of process and trying to make sense of all of this stuff that they're being faced with and they're learning about. I think that's one of the things that's going on. I think also there's more talk about mental health in general. And so I think there is a portion of that is just an awareness of these different things of looking after our mental health, of talking about it, recognizing it, being aware, accessing help when we're struggling. I think that's a component as well.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you for that. And so something I also wanted to go back to, you did mention teenagers, it is normal for them to have that separation, that independence, separating from their guardians and becoming independent. But something I want to talk about is the flip side of it is the parents, because I know a lot of parents really struggle with that, with kind of letting go and accepting teenagers separating and staying out later, spending a lot of time with friends. What do you say to parents about teenagers separating, and how could they accept it more and allow it to happen? But also, what is normal for teens in that separation and what isn't, so they know what they should worry about and what they shouldn't worry about?
A large part of it is kind of like framing it as the long game in a sense. I mean, there's multiple components to it, but I think this idea of teens are kind of in this developmental phase where they're still, children, but they're breaking away from that stage. And then they're trying on a whole bunch of adult type roles because they're bridging towards adulthood. And so they're testing all these different things out to see, like what works. And they need to know that they have kind of like a safe base to land. And so parents, guardians can be that kind of like that safe base to land. But at the same time, the idea is that we want to be able to raise people that are independent, that are resilient, that are capable, and that are able to function in the world. And so anytime that we can give teens opportunities to make decisions, to make choices, to learn from their mistakes, to learn about their capacities, like what they're able to do and what their strengths are, we're doing them a service. We are really helping them along that journey of becoming a functioning adult, if you will. And so that letting go process, sometimes when parents are like, oh, okay, like it's hard to let go. And it really is, knowing that it's like serving a larger purpose. And it in fact is actually helping your teen with that, some of those developmental strands into adulthood. Sometimes framing that a little bit differently, it just feels different. Right. And so then what I tend to see is sometimes parents are able to maybe not take some of the things so personally, because maybe there's like a sassy comment that comes their way, or something that happens like in the relationship, some pushback or whatever the case may be, and they're able to kind of like put that into context and say, okay, of course parents have expectations and rules and everything, but it's just they're able to put that into context and say, okay, this is part of them figuring out their identity or testing out different roles or working on their independence. It just gives it a little bit of a different spin on things.
Yeah, definitely. Can you speak a little bit, not taking things personally that the teenage daughter will be mean or nasty to the adult. So what do you say to those parents that, because I hear it all the time, like, oh, she's just so nasty. She's just so mean. She's just so, crabby and rude to me. And, these parents, they do really love their teenagers, but it's hard for them. They don't know how to navigate the relationship, the conversation. A lot of parents will say they feel like they're walking on eggshells, that kind of thing. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's, my heart goes out to parents of teens, and I have a teen at home right now. And I know that, words, they can hurt, and it's hard to not take it personally at times. So I definitely want to share that there's a lot of empathy there for parents as they go through that. There's a couple of things when you're thinking about that idea of they're sassy and they're saying something mean, and what do you do with that? How do you navigate that? A part of it is about being able to, like I said, not take it personally, but also think about how can I maybe insert a little teachable moment here. Some parents will say things like, yeah, if you keep talking to people like that, I'm not sure you're going to have too many friends, or just something that kind of get them to think about the way they're talking to people, or, I get that you're really upset, but I'm not going to continue the conversation if we, keep it with this tone, or whatever the case may be. So just being able to kind of say to your teen, or let your teen know that like socially, when we talk to people this way, it's not really something that's probably going to get you what you want. So it's kind of like a teaching ground, if you will. And then at the same time, knowing like when to kind of put your foot down, if you will, or like push the issue, and when to just go, this is not worth escalating the situation.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that's definitely good to know. And so on the flip side, we also
Yep.
have those parents that, I think it comes from love and they really want that relationship with their teen. So they're more like in the friend role rather than the parental role. And, they want to be almost like the cool parent, the parent that their teen can come to them with everything. In your opinion, do you think that's recommended, or was there a better approach to forming a healthy relationship with your teenager?
The bond with a teen is a very important thing, and it's important for you to be there and be present and have that relationship with your teen. At the same time, when we get down to that friend level, what ends up happening is that our teen isn't necessarily receiving that kind of container of safety and security that they might need from that adult role. So as parents, even though we get the pushback from our teens, when our teens know that there are limits and expectations and rules and responsibilities, it actually gives them a little bit of a container of safety, like knowing what to expect. It can serve them in the long run too, as they kind of go out into the world, knowing that they're going to have supervisors or bosses or different people in positions of power throughout their life. And it gives them also the ability to learn like how to manage and how to navigate situations with folks in different interactions. So I think although being friends with your teen sounds like maybe a good idea to some, I would say that we want to have that trust and that bond and that relationship with them, but we also want them to know that we're there as the parent, we're there as the life raft, if you will, so that they can go out and explore and know that they can come back if they need kind of like that backbone.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I say often too, is that I think a lot of parents have that mindset of, if they're going to break the rule anyway, they're going to go out anyway. What's the point in setting the curfew? I think a lot of parents kind of have that mindset because they don't want to fight it. But I think that it's very important to set those rules and set those boundaries. And your teen, they're going to break the rules. They're going to push the boundaries. They're going to test their limits. But I think it's so important for them to know that at that moment they are breaking a rule. I think that it's important that they know that they have those limits and know that they're pushing them, because they're aware. They know when they break rules. They're very smart. They know when they're testing the limits, and maybe some don't, but some are aware. And I think that it's important for them to know that this is my parents' rule and I am breaking it, and there will be consequences for my actions.
When you talked about that, I think like, yeah, parents do often say to me, like they're struggling with, like, do I just let things go because of the battle? And I think that can be a big one too, is when conflict escalates, or when a parent feels like they're constantly in like a negative interaction with their teen. It can be really stressful and just really difficult, like really deflating to kind of feel that way. And so oftentimes we'll start to strategize and talk about like how the parent can have other types of interactions with their teen, even if they're like in small chunks or small like glimmers of the relationship, to start building that aspect, so that then when they have to play the parent card, if you will, it doesn't take a hit on the relationship as much. Like the emotional bank account kind of philosophy. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but just if your audience isn't, but just this idea that in each of our relationships, we have these withdrawals and these deposits. And if you think about that parent-teen relationship, there are things that are going to deposit into the relationship, and so build it up, put it into the black or the green or whatever, and they're going to nurture the bond, and whether that's quality time together, whether that's your teen doing their chore, it goes both ways, right? Whether that's things that you say, like noticing their efforts or noticing something that they've done or taking an interest in something. So these are things that can be kind of the deposit sides of things. And then there are the withdrawals, which are the things that kind of like they hit the relationship. And so this is things like nagging or arguing or conflict or insults. And so it's good to kind of take stock of like where things are at. And this comes out of the research of Gottman on relationships. And he had said, 5 positive interactions to 1 negative. And so it's not an exact science necessarily, but just thinking about that, like how many positive interactions have I had with my team today versus negative ones? It's good to kind of like take a little bit of an inventory of that. And that will also tell you a bit of like why your team is maybe responding in a certain way to certain things.
Okay, great. I think that's really helpful. And do you have any sort of other common negative mindsets or blocks that parents experience when it comes to building a relationship with their teenager?
One that kind of comes to mind a little bit is this idea of treating, this is kind of what I hear. So treating them like a child, expecting them to act like an adult. And I think that one can be a little bit tricky. And so like what I mean by that is, when parents kind of get in that mindset of like they've really restricted things, or they really don't give their teens a lot of freedom of choice or ability to kind of like go out there and try things. And yet they really do expect them to like show up in a very responsible way and make good decisions. And so that can be a bit of a tricky one, right? Because it's kind of like asking someone to do something without giving them the ability to practice it. And so I think that can be a tricky one that I often see in parent-teen relationships as well.
As for teenagers' behavior, can you speak a little bit to what is a typical teenage girl behavior versus at risk, maybe negative behaviors that parents should pick those battles and should be aware of?
This will kind of vary, of course, depending on the person, their temperament, their personality, their age and development, and all of that. So it's important to kind of keep those factors present and front of mind. What I would say is, stuff to kind of pay attention to whenever there is any kind of extremes happening. And so, for example, if your teen is always pushing the limits, always breaking the rules, always going outside of what's expected of them, that's reason for concern and raises alarm bells pretty naturally. And then on the flip side of that, like if your teen is never testing any boundaries, and parents might be like, well, that's fine, let's just leave that be. But if they're never testing any boundaries, they're never pushing back or anything like that, there might be something else at play there that's preventing them from being able to start to grow in that developmental strand particularly. And so that would be another thing to pay attention to as well. Any extremes.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I think that's definitely good for parents to hear for sure. And as for like discipline with the behaviors, with the pushing back, I know a lot of parents say they just give up. They don't know how to discipline their teen. They don't know what to do. So do you have any examples or ideas for parents of ways that they can discipline their teen when they do break an important rule or test the limits maybe too much?
In terms of like discipline and expectations, some of this stuff is a little bit like if you will, and then also like you can tweak it if you're already like in that place where you feel like you need to change things and things are not working anymore. And so what I mean by that is oftentimes I'll talk to parents about having clear expectations and rules for their teen and discussing those as a family. So some families have a more collaborative nature to them, and for some it's different, and it may depend on the parenting style, of course, but really, talking about like these are the things that we expect around chores or contributions to the family household. These are the things that we expect around outings or whatever, and knowing that that's going to constantly change. This is not like a fixed kind of thing that you're coming up with, but as different situations and scenarios start to become relevant to your teen's life, then you'll have to think and rethink those different expectations and those different rules that your family might have, but being really clear about them from the outset and communicating those to your teen as much as possible beforehand. Now, I know we can't discuss everything and we can't cover all the possible scenarios that are going to come up, but as much as possible, being really clear on that. Collaborating on some of those as well. When it comes to discipline, like some of the things that I found that have worked really well when something does kind of come up is having a discussion about the consequences. I'm not necessarily saying they're negotiating consequences, but the parent and teen are talking about that. Like, this is the consequences that we're going to have. So whether that is something that has them removed privileges or whatever it is, and this is the reason why, and then their teen and them have a conversation about it. The other piece that kind of comes to mind is this idea of like using discipline as a way of imparting wisdom or teaching something with regards to the issue that came up, rather than going straight to something like removing the phone or, like the things that hit them emotionally kind of thing. Just really thinking about discipline in a sense of like, how is this linked or how is this possibly connected to teaching them about values or teaching them about things that are important for us as a family or important for them as they grow older. So really kind of trying to like link that. That would be another piece around discipline that I think could be a helpful thing to keep in mind.
Okay, great. And yeah, I think that discipline can be very important. Like you said, teaching a lesson and instilling some wisdom. What about those parents that really struggle with discipline and those parents that won't have a talk with their child or don't discipline them in any way or take away the phone, like nothing, but go to like yelling? Because I know in my experience with some clients, their parents are yellers and they'll yell a lot at their teen. And that is the discipline, just getting screamed at or yelled at. Can you speak to that a little bit? Like, what are the effects of that? How effective, ineffective is that?
Yeah, I can speak to that because I'm a yeller and I'm a yeller who's constantly working on that. It is super inefficient. If anything, right? If anything, it just makes you feel worse afterwards because then you've yelled and you got your vent out, but it really didn't fix anything, or it might have made the problem worse in the end. So I guess a couple of things around that. Like when we're yelling and lecturing and just saying like lots, it truly is a vent. If we think about it from how is it benefiting our teen? I mean, first of all, our teen has like a very short attention span. I mean, we all kind of have short attention spans, but younger folks shorter. And so if we're yelling and giving lectures and stuff, it's not effective. They're not hearing what you're saying. Secondly, if we're yelling, our teen's going to go into defense mode, right? They're not listening to what we're saying. Except nobody likes to be yelled at. So as soon as that kind of behavior starts happening, there's like a wall that goes up, and so super ineffective. And also kind of modeling that this is how we deal with our emotions. Overall, it's just not one of those strategies that works super well. And at the same time, I know that I fall into that trap sometimes under like frustration or just like an emotional outburst. What I have been learning to do, aside from working on different ways of doing that, but is also being authentically genuine around my apologies and my humanness with my teen, and going back to things. So let's say I lost my cool, which we don't have to let's say I've done that before, right? I will go back and say, you know what, like last night I lost my cool. I started yelling. It wasn't my, shining parent moment. And I'm sorry. Then him and I can have a discussion, or we can go back to the thing in a calmer, cooler manner. And I can still talk about the things that I think are important to talk about, but I'm not doing it in a way where I'm yelling and it's not getting the point across and no one's learning from it.
And as for those parents that don't have a great relationship with their teen, but they want one, but they really don't have that kind of open communication with their teen, maybe the relationship's very closed off. Do you have any advice for them or anything that they could kind of start with to start building up that relationship?
Starting small is, something to keep in mind. I'll look at different things to play with in terms of the environment. And so maybe it's going for a drive somewhere and you just kind of talk about whatever, but you have that kind of enclosed area, if you will, where it's kind of like parallel. So you're sitting side by side instead of face to face. So there's less pressure for each of you to kind of perform, if you will, to be talking. Maybe find ways to take an interest in what your teen enjoys, even if it's not really your thing. And so if they're really into a particular video game, or if they're really into a particular sport, maybe, just even sitting down at the TV and watching a game together, or asking if they can teach you how to play that video game. Just little things like that, I think, can be ways of starting to foster that relationship.
I agree. And in my experience, I think even though the teens are pushing their parents away, they do really crave that relationship with their parent.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree with what you're saying there too. Another piece just around that, the relationship piece, if parents are able to take care of themselves as well, which is a really important piece, I think that can also open some doors for fostering a relationship with your teen. Because if you're in a better headspace and you're feeling kind of like top of your game, or you're really caring for yourself, you will have more to give in your various relationships.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree. And with the parents that maybe have that relationship with their teenagers, so you spoke earlier about how important having a trusted supportive network is for teens. How can a parent become a supportive person to their teenager, somebody that their teenager knows that they can count on and trust?
First of all, I think listening is such a big thing. So saying less and listening more is something that I often will talk to parents about. This idea of like sitting back and asking questions with genuine curiosity, with the disclaimer that, sometimes you're going to ask a question and you're going to get an eye roll, or you're going to get a, I don't know. And that's just the way it is. And that's okay. Don't give up, keep doing it. So I think like that's one thing, is listen more, be curious, take an interest in their stuff.
Yeah, I think those are really great suggestions for parents. I know one battle that parents consistently have is the phone. The teen's always on the phone. And then I think a lot of times the parent is anxious because they don't know what their teen is doing on the phone. And, they're worried about like sexting and all these things. So Can you speak a little bit about parents and their teens' relationship with their phone and what they can do, maybe how they could kind of tackle that, and maybe the boundaries they could put in place, expectations? Can you speak to that a bit?
For sure. Yes, the phone is, definitely a thing. Okay, so first of all would be talk about the phone, talk about the concerns. If there's something that you are worried about, I think it's good to have those in conversation with your teen. Like if you're concerned about sexting, or if you're concerned about what they're looking at, have a conversation about what they're using their phone for, what are their favorite apps, what do they like to do while they're on there. Be curious about that. Another piece is every parent is going to have a different kind of iteration of what this looks like, but it's easier to give than it is to take away. Having the limitations at first, and then you're able to kind of gradually increase that while you're having conversations, while you're maybe gaining some more knowledge, and you're kind of figuring out how they're using their phone, and you can gradually increase their ability to do things. It's much easier to do that than to say like, I've given you free reign and now I'm going to take this away and take that away and take that away, because I'm worried that these things are being used in a way that's like not appropriate. The other piece is, when it comes to phones in particular, I think is for parents to just understand that it is their social lifeline for a lot of teens. And I think in particular over this last couple of years, where there was a lot of the lockdowns and isolation and the inability to see their friends face to face, teens really had to and they were already online in the first place, but really had to rely on that as their way of communicating with their peers and their friends. And it is an important aspect for them socially. And so it's just, kind of understanding that is a part of today's generation and how they interact with people. And at the same time, it's okay to have, expectations and boundaries around the technology use. And the reason for that is, because we know that there are a lot of negative health outcomes that can come with overusage. It can disrupt sleep. It can decrease mood and whatnot, depending on what it is they're using it for and how often they're using it for. So it's good to have those expectations and those rules around it. And at the same time, an understanding that this is an important tool for teens growing up in this culture anyhow, in this day and age.
That's so true. Well, yeah, Chantal, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Do you have any last words of wisdom or advice for parents of teenage girls?
One of the things that just kind of comes to my mind is keep showing up with love, lead with love, keep listening, keep being curious. If something doesn't work the first time, continue to try things, be open to that. I don't know, try and tap into your teen years a little bit, because I found that to be a little bit of a tool that has helped me, just kind of remembering how difficult certain moments were, or how socially anxious or awkward I was. It's really given me an appreciation for different things that have come up, and give yourself some grace, as parents, knowing that you're human. And so that means that you're going to mess up sometimes and make mistakes, and they're going to mess up sometimes and make mistakes. It's important to forgive ourselves and to forgive our teens, knowing that they're just doing the best they can.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you have any social media or anything that anybody can find you or follow you at all?
For sure. And thank you for asking me that. So as a teen life coach, we have a happiness pill program started, which is a teen life coaching program. And people can find that on our website, which is pyramidpsychology.com. We're on TikTok, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube, we're on Facebook under the handle of Pyramid Psychology. So people can find us there. We're constantly creating content and different things for teens and for parents. We have an anxiety and depression toolkit for parents raising teen girls, which is just about to launch. So probably when this podcast is out, it will be ready to go, and it's a free download for parents so that they have some strategies on how to support their teens who are struggling with anxiety and depression.
Great. Fantastic. All of that, everyone, will be in the show notes. So definitely check that out. Chantal, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh my gosh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chantal. I think that this episode was so important and very, very valuable for those that have a teenager in their life that they very much care about. Now, I know we spoke a lot about teenage girls, but I think a lot of what we spoke about with the boundaries and the discipline and things like that, that does apply to other children and teenagers of other genders as well. So definitely take this episode to heart. And if you have a teenager in your life that you love and care about, try to implement what Chantal was talking about. I think it could be very important. And if you're a guardian or parent struggling with your relationship with your teens, there is hope. And I know that it could be very frustrating and upsetting that teens, they do push you away and they build these walls, but they almost want you to break down these walls in a way. They do want a relationship with you. They do love you, even though it doesn't seem like it. Chantal's advice was really, really great. She had a lot of great words of wisdom. And I think that there is hope for you building a relationship with your teenager. These are really rough years. Like Chantal said, think back to when you were a teen. It was a hard time, probably some of the hardest times in my life for sure. So thank you, Chantal. I think this is very helpful for people to hear. And like I said in the episode, everything of Chantal's you can find in the show notes. Everything will be linked there. So definitely go check that out. Thank you so much for listening today. I hope you have a great week.